Israel's ongoing war to eliminate Hamas provides a daily reminder of the global threats that the U.S. and our democratic allies face. The international crises that have occurred on the Biden administration's watch, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Israel, combined with our own porous southern border, demonstrates that the safety of the U.S. homeland remains vulnerable if effective steps are not taken to counter our adversaries. We can fight them at home or we can fight them abroad. And this is all happening with a backdrop of more and more Americans not trusting our own government because in many cases, government agencies have been weaponized against conservatives. So how do we protect ourselves against the growing global threats with unprecedented challenges here at home? It's not easy. Joining me now to talk about this, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who served during the Trump administration. He also served as director of the CIA during the Trump administration. Prior to that, was a member of the Congress from the state of Kansas. Secretary Pompeo, welcome back to Washington Watch. Always good to have you on the program.
It's a joy to be with you, Tony. Thanks for having me on this evening.
I want to talk with you about two really important issues that are before Congress this week. Congress currently has the opportunity to address several global issues in the next few days. And let's begin with foreign aid and what you'd like to see happen both as it pertains to Israel and Ukraine. Now, the backdrop, obviously, we have a lot of debt, $34 trillion in debt, reckless spending that's taken place over decades. We have Ukraine, a lot of money have already gone there. Conservatives opposed to that. But let's talk about what happens if America does not continue standing with Ukraine.
Well, Tony, my view has been since the beginning is that it is an absolute American imperative. I care about the Ukrainian people. They're creatures of God. We're all created in his image. But when you think about American security, we should put American people first. And from where I sat as Secretary of State and CIA Director, it was absolutely imperative that we not allow Vladimir Putin to successfully take chunks of Europe. We were able to deter that for 4 years under President Trump. President Biden lost that very deterrence. And now the Ukrainian people are simply asking for our help with getting the tools they need to push back against this tyrannical fellow named Vladimir Putin and his Russian regime. This is deeply in our interest. It's in our interest because we buy products from Ukraine that matter. It's in our interest because Vladimir Putin, in control of a friend and ally in Europe, which is in the inevitable consequence of a failure to defend Ukraine. Those are things that impact people in Oklahoma and my home state of Kansas and all across this nation. So this is an American national security imperative that simply says we should provide the Ukrainians with the tools they need to help them defend their sovereign borders. It's not that we shouldn't get our own sovereign borders right. There's lots of things we need to do there. We need to make sure this money is used in a way that is accountable so it goes to the right places. But in the end, America has a deep interest in not letting Vladimir Putin win. America needs to win. The West needs to win. And every one of our friends and allies around the world is watching, as are our adversaries. And a failure here, letting Vladimir Putin be triumphant, would be enormously devastating for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, who might well have to go fight, and bad for our nation as well.
So, Mr. Secretary, let me ask you a question if you see this as a potential outcome here. If from reports, Ukraine is running short on the munitions needed to execute this war, and in fact, they're at a disadvantage with Russia having some longer range artillery than they do, so they're looking for the Patriot missiles to be able to do more defense. But if we see a resurgence of Russia, which what we're seeing right now, and we're moving back into a season where they could execute the war more successfully, that is Russia, if they roll into Kyiv and beyond, and we see them move into, is there the possibility we'd see them move into a NATO country as Putin would like to reestablish the glory days of Russia? And could that draw the U.S. into this war in a much greater way?
Tony, in some ways, you made my point better than I did in your question. This is the risk. One of the critiques has been from, frankly, some on the left and some on the right, that this is expensive. That's true. The next tranche of funding is around $60 billion. I'm happy if we do that in the form of a loan and the Ukrainians are required to pay it back. But there's no doubt $60 billion is a significant amount of money. But the cost to the United States taxpayer, if Vladimir Putin rolls through Kyiv, will exceed that by orders of magnitude. And so, penny wise, pound foolish. We ought to do the right thing when we're not asking for our kids; they're just asking for our stuff. If you're just worried about the federal fisc, which of course folks like you and I are, Tony, this is the right solution there. But beyond that, it's hard to get back. Once you lose deterrence, which Biden did, it's very difficult to get back. And the mistake that President Biden has made is that he hasn't allowed the Ukrainians to actually fight to win. He's only given them the things they need to fight this to a draw. That's an enormous mistake. When mothers in Moscow put their children to bed at night safely, and mothers in Kyiv and other European capitals are worried, the American people are not being served well by their leadership in the White House.
Is NATO forces in Europe, are they ready to take on Russia?
Yes, I think that you can. The answer to that question is yes, but it's, as you know, Tony, it's incredibly complicated. So we often think to tanks and soldiers, infantrymen, but think space, think cyber, think all the other domains where this competition will take place. The Europeans are in pretty good shape, but there's a lot more work to be done. And as we can see, even in Israel and Gaza, these nations need American support. Israel has a very capable military; they can do a lot, but they need America to come alongside them for both the moral support provided and the technological and capability support that we provide as well.
And of course, the support for Ukraine, as it's come over from the Senate, is connected to the funding for Israel, which many in the House want to do, even though they're reluctant on the funding for Ukraine. But we're going to see the outcome of this week. And I know you are passionate about supporting Israel. You did a lot during your administration, your time as Secretary of State, to help Israel. A lot of that has been reversed by this administration.
Yes, and Americans are worse off for that. And frankly, the Jewish people, the people of Israel, for that matter, of all faiths, in the rightful Jewish homeland, are worse off for it as well. Tony, you can see this. The Iranians who support Hamas are now running free. They feel like the United States has abandoned Israel, and so they are less likely to return the American hostages. They are less likely to stand down in, October 7th again and again and again. And had the United States done the right thing and stayed with Israel, I'm confident there would be less risk today than we find ourselves here in America and throughout the Middle East as we sit here.
You bring up a point. Our enemies don't fear us. But as we turn our attention here a little bit closer to home, Americans have more fear of our government than foreign actors. And I want to talk about something that you know a lot about, you've spoken about, and I know that you have consulted with the Speaker on this, is something that's up before Congress this week. They're going to have to deal with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, known as FISA. Section 702, which is set to expire, which is very controversial. However, the House has put forth about 56 different reform elements to this. I want you to speak to the importance of this tool, but also how it was abused and how it can be fixed. And with this backdrop, that Americans don't trust their government.
Yeah. Look, Tony, I completely get how Americans watched what Andy McCabe and Jim Comey did at the FBI, and they have lost trust and confidence in the FBI leadership. I can see it. I can feel it. They're right to be concerned, and we all, as good conservatives, worry about our government and its overreach. Those are very reasonable concerns. The question is, how do you balance that? How do you get that right? And in this instance, I'll say two things. This particular provision, Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, saved hundreds of American lives during my time as CI director, as Secretary of State. I saw it. Its purpose is to collect intelligence on foreigners, not Americans. That's where it operates. It does sometimes, if you or I speaking to someone abroad who's a bad guy, it could collect our Americans' data too. So I get the concern that flows from that. And it was abused. It was abused against President Trump personally. It's been abused other times by folks going and looking at what their girlfriends were up to. Those are tragic. Those are governmental failures. But I pray that we won't throw out the really important collection to solve that problem, because I think you can solve the problem through the dozens of reforms that are here. We often talk about FBI officials not being held accountable. These FBI reforms that are in this bill will put criminal penalties in place for someone who does precisely what I just spoke about. It transcribes the court hearings so that members of Congress can get oversight. It ties compensation of FBI officials to the failures to process correctly any Americans whose information was collected up. It reduced by 90% the number of people who can actually have access to any Americans' information. So we have significantly sought to address the very concerns that the American people rightfully have. And I hope everybody will take on board. There will be terrorist acts that take place that could have been prevented if this act is not renewed. And that's not hyperbole. It's not a threat. It recognizes the risk, but I hope everyone will acknowledge that we also need a government that is chasing bad guys around the world to keep us all safe. And I pray that we'll continue to be able to have the tools to permit them to do so.
I mean, this is the downside to a government that has lost its way. When we lose our moral footing and we have a government that becomes weaponized against its political opponents, and we've seen it with former President Trump, how the government has been weaponized against him. It shakes our confidence in our government, and that is an open door for our enemies. This is it's a perfect storm that we're entering into because we have lost our way.
Yeah. You couldn't say it better than that. When you walk away from your Judeo-Christian founding, when your institutions are corrupted and behave in political ways, when you're prosecuting a candidate for president of a major political party in multiple jurisdictions over allegations that are just clearly ungrounded. When those things happen, the American people take note and they lose confidence in these important institutions. You can see it in the lack of confidence in the military that I served in as a young officer. You can see the lack of confidence in our Federal Bureau of Investigation. You see that, then the American people rightly say, hey, what the heck is going on? And we're going to go grab this and fix it. I actually think the FISA legislation does precisely what it is the American people should be asking it to do. It reforms it, it attempts to fix it, it holds those responsible for malfeasance accountable. But I understand the mindset. And Tony, this is what you and I know. When a government becomes unmoored in a republic like ours, where the central thesis is the American people trust that their leaders are there doing the right thing on behalf of America, not of themselves, then you do truly risk this republic. I've said this time and time again. I worry about the Chinese Communist Party. Vladimir Putin's a bad guy. Chairman Kim in North Korea is really dangerous. The most dangerous thing we have is that the American people lose their confidence in our democracy and in our republic. If that happens, because of malfeasance of our leaders, we are truly at risk.
I mean, we have to fight, and what I hear you saying is we have to fight the urge to react emotionally as we all are angry over what we see, and we have to respond in a clear-headed fashion, thinking what is best for this republic and what it will take to preserve it. And we can't throw out the very tools that are needed to keep this nation safe, but we do need to throw out those who would misuse those tools.
I couldn't agree more. For me, that's not partisan. It is absolutely the case that the folks who have misused, we saw it with the IRS, we saw it with the FBI, the folks that have misused these tools, it's been done against people like you and I, evangelical Christian conservatives, Republicans. Those are the people who have been the targets of this governmental abuse. That's why we have a special place, a special responsibility. And for me, it is very emotional to make sure we get this stuff right, to create a structure that can protect against this government abuse. Tony, I think about, if this bill weren't to pass, it would deny us the capacity to collect against foreigners. But make no mistake about it, if there's a bad actor at the FBI and they still want to go chase data, the fact that this didn't pass won't stop that bad actor. Right. But sadly, these provisions that will penalize them for that behavior won't be in place either. So I think this is a significant step forward. It'll prove imperfect against the human condition as well, Tony. Evil walks the earth. But I think this is a big step in the right direction that will protect every American, including those of us who hold conservative Christian viewpoints.
Well, Mr. Secretary, your word carries a lot of weight here at Washington Watch. So thank you so much for joining us today. Always great to see you.
Thank you, Tony. Bless you. Have a good evening.